Maya Johnson stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of the Parker family's Hamptons estate, her fingers trembling slightly as she adjusted the pearl necklace that felt like it was choking her. The necklace had been a gift from Elizabeth Parker, her mother-in-law, who had presented it with a thin smile and whispered, "Perhaps this will help you look the part, dear." 3 years of marriage to James Parker, and Maya still felt like an actress playing a role she hadn't auditioned for. She took a deep breath, smoothed down her dress, a designer piece she'd spent too much on just to avoid the sideways glances from James's sisters, and stepped out into the hallway. The sounds of refined laughter and classical music drifted up from the garden party below. Maya had met James 6 years ago at a charity gala in Boston. She had been there representing Dow Chemical, where she worked as a senior chemical engineer, developing sustainable materials. James had been charming, attentive, and seemingly impressed by her intellect and ambition. Their whirlwind romance had felt like a fairy tale, the brilliant scientist and the charismatic real estate heir. The Parker family had smiled politely at their engagement announcement, though Maya had caught the concerned glances exchanged between Elizabeth and Richard Parker, James's father. "Just be yourself," James had assured her before introducing her to his family. "They'll love you as much as I do." What naive advice that had been. As Maya descended the grand staircase, she caught sight of Elizabeth Parker in the garden, holding court among her friends from the Metropolitan Museum Board. The older woman's eyes flickered briefly to Maya, a momentary assessment that left Maya feeling like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be welcomed. "Ah, there she is," Elizabeth called out with practiced warmth that never quite reached her eyes. Our Maya." As if she were a pet the family had acquired. Maya joined the circle, accepting a flute of champagne from a passing server. The conversation resumed. Talks of boarding schools, summer homes in Europe, and family connections that stretched back generations. "Maya was just telling me about her fascinating work with polymers," James's cousin Vanessa interjected, a rare ally who seemed genuinely interested in Maya's world. "Oh, darling, let's not talk shop at a party," Elizabeth said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Maya, did James tell you about the foundation board position? We think it would be perfect for you. Something meaningful to occupy your time once you decide to step back from that laboratory." Maya felt James's hand press against her lower back, a warning touch she had grown to recognize. "Mother has connections with several excellent charities," James said, the slight strain in his voice noticeable only to Maya. "It would be a good transition, especially when we start thinking about family." Maya took a long sip of her champagne, wishing it were something stronger. The assumption that she would abandon her career, her passion, her decade of education and hard work, had become a recurring theme. Initially, James had defended her choices, proudly telling his friends about her patents and innovations. But, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he had begun to echo his family's expectations. "Actually, I'm leading a new research project at Dow," Maya said, keeping her voice level. "We're developing biodegradable packaging that could revolutionize several industries." Elizabeth's smile tightened. "How industrious of you." Richard Parker appeared at his wife's side, his imposing figure commanding attention. "James, the Hamiltons are here. They're interested in the Boston development." His eyes flickered briefly to Maya. "Family business," he added, though no one had asked. James hesitated for only a moment before following his father, leaving Maya alone with Elizabeth and her friends. This, too, had become a pattern. These subtle exclusions, the invisible lines drawn between family business and Maya's place in their world. "Maya, dear," Elizabeth said once James was out of earshot. "I've been meaning to talk to you about the winter charity ball. I think it would be lovely if you co-chaired the decorations committee this year." "I'm presenting at a conference in Berlin that week," Maya replied. "I mentioned it at dinner last month." Elizabeth's expression flickered between annoyance and pity. "Well, priorities change when you're part of a family like ours, the Parker." name carries certain obligations. The afternoon dragged on endlessly. Maya drifted between conversations where she was either invisible or a curiosity to be examined. By sunset, she had retreated to a quiet corner of the garden, her social energy depleted. That's when she overheard them, James and his mother, their voices carrying from the nearby terrace. "She's brilliant, Mother, but she's making this harder than it needs to be," James was saying, his voice tinged with frustration. "Every Parker wife has understood her role." "She comes from a different world, darling," Elizabeth replied. "No. Family connections, academic parents. It's not her fault she doesn't understand how things work. But it's been 3 years. Either she adapts, or you need to consider whether this experiment has run its course." Maya felt ice spreading through her veins. "I love her. But sometimes I wonder if you weren't right from the beginning." James sighed. "She just doesn't fit in." A laugh, James's laugh, followed this confession, and Maya's heart cracked. "Remember, when she tried to explain molecular bonding to Uncle Henry at Christmas, poor Uncle Henry looked like he wanted to dive into his whiskey." More laughter. Maya stood frozen, unseen behind the carefully manicured hedge. "I've arranged for Richard to speak with Harold at Mitchell & Price," Elizabeth said. "They have an excellent corporate social responsibility department. Maya could head it, reasonable hours, prestigious title, and she'd be home in time to attend functions and start a family. That scientific tinkering is hardly a long-term plan." "I'll talk to her," James promised. "After the Hamptons season. She'll understand eventually." Maya backed away silently, her mind suddenly, crystallinely clear. The years of subtle undermining, the gradual erosion of James's support, the constant pressure to become someone else, it all coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. She was never going to be enough as she was. That night, as James slept beside her, Maya stared at the ceiling, tears sliding silently into her hair. For 3 years, she had tried to balance her identity with their expectations. For 3 years, she had believed James when he said he was proud of her accomplishments, even as he suggested she scale them back. For 3 years, she had endured the thinly veiled contempt of his family, believing that love would eventually bridge the gap. But love, Maya now understood, was not enough when respect was absent. And in that moment of clarity, as the first light of dawn crept through the windows of their Hamptons bedroom, Maya Johnson made her decision. She would leave. Not with a confrontation or dramatic accusations. The Parkers would expect that from someone they considered emotional and unrefined. No, Maya would disappear with the quiet dignity they had never recognized in her. And someday, they would understand exactly what they had lost. 3 weeks after the garden party, Maya sat in her office at Dow Chemical, staring at the email she had just received. The Parker Family Foundation was hosting their annual gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and, as James's wife, her presence was naturally expected. Elizabeth had gone so far as to select a gown for her. Something appropriate, the message implied, from Bergdorf Goodman. All Maya needed to do was attend the final fitting. Maya closed her laptop and gazed out at the Boston skyline. The research lab behind her hummed with activity, her team working diligently on the biodegradable packaging project that had become her professional sanctuary. Here, she was Dr. Maya Johnson, respected for her mind and her contributions. Here, no one suggested she would be better suited to choosing tablecloths or hosting ladies' luncheons. "Dr. Johnson?" Her assistant, Zoe, appeared at the door. "Your 2 o'clock is here, and Dr. Patel asked if you could review the polymer stability results before tomorrow's meeting." Maya nodded, grateful for the interruption to her thoughts. "Thank you, Zoe. And could you clear my schedule for Friday?" "Afternoon. I need to take care of some personal matters." Friday would be perfect. James was flying to Chicago for a development project, and the house staff at their Boston brownstone had Fridays off. She would have a precious window of privacy, something increasingly rare in her marriage. For days, Maya had been making subtle preparations. A new bank account at a credit union where the Parkers had no connections. A small apartment viewing, in Cambridge, under her maiden name. Consultations with a lawyer friend who specialized in high net worth divorces. Though Maya wanted nothing from the Parkers except her freedom. On Thursday night, James kissed her goodbye with distracted affection. "I'll be back Sunday evening. Don't forget Mother's Charity Committee meeting on Saturday. They're finalizing the fall schedule." Maya nodded, knowing she would never attend another Parker family obligation again. She watched him from the bedroom window as his driver loaded his luggage into the town car, noting how he didn't look back at the house before sliding into the back seat. "Goodbye, James," she whispered to the empty room. The next morning, after her usual departure time for work, Maya remained in the brownstone. She moved through the rooms with quiet purpose, gathering only what truly mattered to her. Her grandmother's recipes, handwritten on yellowed index cards, her academic journals and research notes, the small jade elephant her parents had given her when she earned her PhD, family photos, her personal laptop, and external hard drives containing years of research. She left behind the designer clothes that had never felt like her own, the jewelry James and his family had given her as silent suggestions of how she should present herself, and the wedding china they had barely used because they so often dined at his parents' home. In their bedroom, Maya opened her jewelry box and removed her engagement ring, a 5-carat diamond that had belonged to James's grandmother, and her wedding band. She placed them on his dresser, alongside a single sheet of cream stationery from Elizabeth's preferred papery. Her hand hovered over the paper, pen poised. What could she possibly say? That she had tried? That she was sorry? No. Maya was done, apologizing for who she was. In her precise handwriting, she wrote simply, "You were right. I don't belong here." Let them interpret that however they wished. Maya called a ride share instead of her usual car service. As she waited by the front door, her phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth. "The seamstress needs to know if you can come at 3 instead of 4 tomorrow. James mentioned you're free all weekend." Maya didn't reply. Instead, she deleted the Parker family group chat, silenced notifications from James's family members, and tucked her phone away. The car arrived, and Maya locked the door to the brownstone, for the last time. Her first stop was the Cambridge apartment she had viewed earlier in the week, a modest one-bedroom in a secure building near MIT, paid 6 months in advance with cash from her personal savings. She dropped off her suitcases and essential documents before heading to the bank. "I'd like to close this account, please," Maya told the private banker who had handled her and James's joint finances for years. The woman looked surprised. "Mrs. Parker, this is a joint account. Both signatories usually..." "Only my personal account," Maya clarified. "The one I had before marriage." Relief flooded the banker's face. "Of course, though you should know the balance is relatively modest compared to your household accounts." The modest sum, just over $220,000 from Maya's years of work before meeting James, and what she had managed to save from her Dow salary, would be enough to sustain her until she could fully re-establish her independent life. Next came the law firm, where her friend Amara worked. They had been roommates in graduate school before Amara chose law over science. "The documents are ready," Amara said, ushering Maya into her office and closing the door. "Power of attorney revoked, medical proxy changed, name change paperwork filed." "But Maya, are you absolutely certain about this? Disappearing like this. The Parkers aren't people who take well to being left." "I'm not disappearing," Maya replied, signing where indicated. "I'm reclaiming my life. There's a difference. They'll try to find you. For a while, perhaps. But I was never truly important to them. Just an accessory James acquired that didn't quite match their decor." Maya smiled sadly. "They'll move. On quickly enough once they realize I'm not coming back with my tail between my legs. By evening, Maya Johnson, no longer Parker, had checked into a hotel under her maiden name. She ordered room service, opened her laptop, and drafted an email to her department head at Dow Chemical. Dear Dr. Reeves, I regret to inform you that due to personal circumstances, I must tender my immediate resignation. She paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Leaving Dow felt like abandoning the last piece of her identity, but she knew the Parkers would look for her there first. James might not have valued her career, but he knew it was important to her. Maya continued typing. I have accepted a research position that requires immediate relocation. My team has all necessary documentation to continue our current project, without interruption. This wasn't entirely a lie. Earlier that month, Maya had been approached by a former colleague who had moved to a startup in Silicon Valley. They needed someone with her expertise, and the offer had remained open. A quick email sent during her day of preparations had confirmed they would still welcome her, now more urgently than ever. After sending her resignation, Maya booked a one-way flight to San Francisco departing Sunday morning. Then she turned off her phone completely and removed the SIM card. From the drawer of the hotel desk, she took out a prepaid phone she had purchased days earlier. This would be her only line of communication until she was settled. That night, Maya slept more peacefully than she had in years, despite the uncertainty that lay ahead. The weight of constantly trying to fit herself into the Parker family mold had been heavier than she realized. Now, with that burden lifted, she could finally breathe. As Sunday morning dawned, Maya stood at the hotel window watching the Boston skyline glimmer in the early light. By now, James would be returning to an empty house, discovering her brief note. Elizabeth would be learning that Maya had missed the charity committee meeting. The carefully constructed narrative of the perfect Parker family would be showing its first public crack. Maya felt no satisfaction in this, only a quiet resolve. Whatever they chose to tell their social circle about her absence, a breakdown, an affair, a return to her less refined roots, didn't matter. For the first time since meeting James Parker, Maya was writing her own story. At Logan International Airport, Maya boarded her flight without looking back. As the plane lifted off, carrying her away from the life she had tried so hard to make, work. She opened her tablet and began sketching ideas for the sustainable battery technology she had been contemplating for years. Research Dow had deemed too experimental, but that she had always believed could change the world. The real Maya Johnson was finally free. San Francisco greeted Maya with fog and a crisp breeze that felt like the physical embodiment of her new beginning. Standing outside the airport with her minimal luggage, she inhaled deeply, tasting salt and possibility in the air. The skyline was so different from Boston's. Less historic grandeur, more audacious modernity. She checked into a modest extended-stay hotel in South San Francisco, far from the luxury accommodations the Parkers would have expected. The room was clean but utilitarian, with a small kitchenette and a desk where she placed her laptop. Maya sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly aware of how truly alone she was. No staff waiting to take her coat, no social calendar filled with obligations, no James asking why she was working late again, just silence and her own thoughts. Her phone, the new prepaid one, chirped with a message from Dr. Vivian Chen, her former colleague and now potential employer. Dinner tonight? 7 p.m. at Mantra. Nothing fancy, just catching up. Maya smiled at the last part. Vivian had met James once at a conference and had later confided to Maya, "He looks at his watch every time you talk about your research." At the time, Maya had defended James, insisting he was just busy. Vivian had simply raised an eyebrow and changed the subject. Mantra turned out to be a small Indian fusion restaurant in the Mission District. Vivian was already seated when Maya arrived, her short silver-streaked hair and oversized glasses exactly, as Maya remembered. "You look both better and worse than I expected," Vivian said by way of greeting, standing to embrace Maya. Better because you're glowing with something that looks like freedom. Worse because you clearly haven't slept properly in days. Maya laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised her with its ease. That's the most accurate assessment I've heard in years. Over plates of cardamom-scented biryani and glasses of crisp, white wine, Maya shared the bare outline of her departure from Boston. Vivian listened without interruption, nodding occasionally. "So," Vivian said when Maya finished, "you need a new life." "I need to reclaim my old one," Maya corrected. "The one where my work matters, where I matter." Vivian's expression softened. "Nexus Innovations would be lucky to have you. We're small, scrappy, and probably paying less than half what Dow did. But no one will ask you to chair a decoration committee. When can I start? How's tomorrow? I'll warn you, your title would be Senior Research Scientist, but you'll be doing everything from running your own experiments to occasionally fixing the coffee machine." Maya smiled. "Perfect." The next morning, Maya entered the converted warehouse that housed Nexus Innovations. The space was open, filled with light from massive windows, and humming with the energy of people deeply engaged in their work. Lab spaces were partitioned with glass walls, creating a sense of both separation and community. Vivian showed her to a small corner desk and lab bench. "It's not much, but it's mine," Maya finished, already setting down her bag. The first months at Nexus were exactly what Maya needed, demanding work that consumed her mind and left little room for dwelling on the past. She threw herself into the research, expanding on the sustainable battery technology concepts she had been developing in her spare time. The team at Nexus was small, just 12 scientists and engineers, but brilliant and dedicated. Maya rented a small apartment in Oakland, commuting across the bay each day. She decorated it minimally, finding she had little attachment to possessions after leaving so many behind. Her evenings were spent poring over research papers and sketching designs for battery prototypes. Sometimes, she would catch herself reaching for her phone to tell James about a breakthrough, only to remember that life was behind her. It was during her 4th month at Nexus that Maya had her first significant breakthrough. She had been experimenting with a novel organic polymer matrix that could potentially replace the toxic components in conventional lithium-ion batteries. "Maya, these results are..." Vivian stared at the data on Maya's computer screen, momentarily, speechless. "Reproducible," Maya finished, trying to contain her excitement. "I've run the test 8 times. The energy density is 40% higher than our best previous attempt, with minimal degradation after 300 cycles." That night, the Nexus team celebrated with takeout and cheap champagne in paper cups. As her colleagues toasted her success, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in the Parker household: genuine pride without qualification, appreciation without expectation. "We need to fast-track this," said Daniel Kwan, Nexus's CEO, who had joined the celebration. "But we'll need funding for the next phase. Significant funding." The room quieted. Nexus was perpetually underfunded, surviving on a patchwork of small grants and minor contracts with larger tech firms. "I might have some ideas," Maya said carefully. The next day, she approached Daniel with a proposal. "We should separate this battery technology into a new venture. I can lead the research team, but we'll need a business development partner who knows how to navigate Silicon Valley." Daniel looked skeptical. "Spinning off technology is complicated and investors will want experienced leadership. Then let's give them that," Maya replied. "But I want controlling interest in the intellectual property. This stays my project." After weeks of negotiation and legal consultations, Horizon Energy Solutions was born, a separate entity from Nexus, but with collaboration agreements in place. Maya became Chief Technology Officer, with Nexus retaining a minority stake. Daniel introduced Maya to Eliza Ramos, a veteran of 3 successful clean tech startups who agreed to serve as CEO. "I've been waiting for battery technology like this," Eliza told Maya during their first meeting. Everyone talks about renewable energy, but storage has always been the bottleneck. If your technology can scale, we're not just building a company, we're changing the energy landscape. Maya was cautious. We're still early stage. The lab results are promising, but manufacturing will be challenging. Eliza grinned. That's why you have me. Your job is to make it work in the lab. Mine is to convince people with deep pockets that we can change the world and make them rich in the process. The partnership proved effective. With Eliza handling the business side, Maya was free to focus on the technology, building a research team that included several scientists she had admired from afar, but never had the opportunity to work with. At Dow 1 year into Horizon's existence, Maya watched as the first full-scale prototype of her battery was installed in a test facility. The sleek black unit didn't look revolutionary. Most truly disruptive technologies didn't. But the potential applications were enormous. Electric vehicles with twice the range, renewable energy storage for homes and businesses, even grid scale. Solutions that could accelerate the transition away from fossil fuels. We're calling this the Johnson Matrix, Eliza announced as they watched the installation. The polymer structure at the heart of the technology. Maya looked up, startled. You're naming it after me? It's your innovation, Eliza said simply. Why wouldn't we? Maya thought of all the times the Parkers had introduced her as James's wife, rather than Dr. Maya Johnson. How Elizabeth had once commented that hyphenating her name would have been unnecessarily complicated. How James had suggested publishing under her married name would open more doors. Now her name, her original name, the one that belonged truly to her, would be attached to her work. The thought brought unexpected tears to her eyes. The first round of professional investment came 6 months later, $10 million from a clean technology venture fund. Then, $30 million more from a consortium of environmentally focused investors. Each funding round brought new challenges and expectations, but also validation that what Maya had created had real-world value. By the third year, Horizon Energy had moved from its small initial space to a larger facility in Palo Alto. Maya had a proper office now, though she spent most of her time in the labs with her team. Her salary had increased substantially, but her lifestyle remained relatively modest. The wealth accumulating in her bank accounts felt almost abstract, a scorecard rather than a necessity. The media began to take notice of Horizon around this time, particularly after the company announced a pilot project with the California state government to install grid-scale batteries at 3 locations. Most of the attention focused on the technology rather than the people behind it, which suited Maya perfectly. She declined most interview requests, sending other team members in her place. You're going to have to step into the spotlight eventually, Eliza cautioned after Maya refused yet another profile piece for a major tech publication. Investors like knowing the genius behind the innovation. Maya shook her head. Let the technology speak for itself. I've had enough of being defined by other people's perceptions. What Maya didn't tell Eliza was that she still occasionally searched for news about the Parkers. James had given a few quotes to Boston Society columns in the months after her departure, vaguely referencing a mutual decision to part ways and a supportive separation. Elizabeth Parker had apparently told her social circle that Maya had suffered a nervous collapse from the pressures of trying to balance too many responsibilities. The truth, of course, was far different. Maya hadn't spoken to any of the Parkers since the day she left. Her lawyer had handled the divorce proceedings, which James had ultimately agreed to without contest, perhaps recognizing the potential social embarrassment of fighting it. The settlement had been straightforward. Maya wanted nothing from the Parker fortune, only the legal severance of their marriage. 4 years after leaving Boston, Maya stood on the stage at a major clean energy conference in Berlin, the same conference she had once told Elizabeth she couldn't miss for a charity ball. She was presenting Horizon's latest breakthrough, a partnership with Tesla to supply next-generation batteries for their vehicles and home energy storage systems. The one. Future of energy isn't just about generation, it's about storage, Maya told the audience of industry leaders and investors. With the Johnson Matrix technology, we've created an energy storage solution that is not only more efficient and longer lasting than current options, but also produced using sustainable materials and manufacturing processes. The presentation was met with a standing ovation. Afterward, as Maya fielded questions from interested companies and potential partners, she noticed Eliza speaking intently with a representative from one of the world's largest electronics manufacturers. They want to discuss acquisition, Eliza informed her later that evening as they celebrated in the hotel bar. $3 billion. Maya nearly choked on her sparkling water. That's a starting point for negotiations, Eliza finished with a grin. I told them we're not interested in being acquired, but we'd consider strategic partnerships. $3 billion. The number seemed impossible. Maya thought back to her small Oakland apartment, to the extended stay hotel she'd first inhabited in San Francisco, to the brownstone in Boston she'd walked away from. The trajectory seemed unreal. What do you want to do? Eliza asked, studying Maya's expression. Maya considered the question carefully. I want to maintain control of our technology, and I want to ensure it's used to make a real difference, not just maximize profits. Eliza nodded. Then that's our position. But Maya, you realize what this means, right? You're not just a successful scientist anymore. You're about to become one of the most influential people in the energy sector. The realization settled over Maya gradually. In the space of 5 years, she had transformed from the outsider at Parker family functions, the wife who didn't quite fit, to a woman on the verge of extraordinary power and influence. Power that came not from marriage or social connections, but from her own mind and determination. The following week, after returning to California, Maya received an email from her assistant. Forbes wants to include you in their most powerful Women in Tech issue. They're very persistent. Maya stared at the message for a long time. She had spent years avoiding publicity, focusing on the work rather than personal recognition. But perhaps it was time to step out of the shadows, not for validation, but to fully own her success. Tell them I'll do it, she replied. But I choose the photographer and approve the final piece. The photo shoot took place in Horizon's research lab, Maya wearing her usual work attire, simple black pants, a crisp button-up shirt, and the lab coat that had been her professional armor for so many years. The interview focused primarily on the technology and Horizon's vision for the future, with only brief mentions of Maya's personal journey. When the issue was published, Maya appeared on the cover, standing amid her battery prototypes, a slight smile on her face and quiet confidence in her stance. The headline read, "The Power Behind the Power: How Dr. Maya Johnson is Revolutionizing Energy Storage." The article included just one line about her personal life. Previously married to Boston real estate heir James Parker, Dr. Johnson founded Horizon Energy following their divorce, channeling her expertise in chemical engineering into creating what many industry experts now consider the most significant advancement in battery technology of the past decade. That single sentence, buried in the middle of the article, was about to change everything. Act 4. The Revelation. James Parker sat in his office at Parker Developments, staring out at the Boston skyline through rain-streaked windows. The view had once represented everything he believed was his birthright: influence, legacy, permanence. Now it felt like looking at a fading photograph. The past 5 years had not been kind to the Parker family fortune. A series of ambitious development projects had faltered during an unexpected economic downturn. Richard Parker's insistence on maintaining their traditional business model, luxury properties for the ultra-wealthy, had proven short-sighted as younger developers embraced mixed-use spaces and sustainable building practices. James's desk was cluttered with reminder notices, projected revenue shortfalls, and a half-empty tumbler of scotch, despite it being only 11 in the morning. The intercom buzzed, and his assistant's voice interrupted his brooding. "Mr. Parker, your mother is on line 1. James sighed, running a hand through hair that had begun graying at the temples. "Tell her I'll call back. She says it's urgent." It was always urgent with Elizabeth Parker these days. Ever since his father had suffered a minor stroke 2 years ago, Elizabeth had taken an increasingly active role in the family business, a role that primarily consisted of pointing out James's shortcomings. He picked up the phone. "Yes, Mother? Have you seen it?" Her voice had the brittle quality it acquired when she was agitated. "Seen what?" "Forbes. The new issue." There was a rustling of pages. "That woman is on the cover." James felt a familiar tightness in his chest. There was only one woman Elizabeth referred to as that woman, his ex-wife, Maya. "I don't subscribe to Forbes," he said flatly. "Well, Harriet Winthrop sent me her copy, with a note saying how fascinating it is to see Dr. Johnson's remarkable success. As if I need Harriet's passive-aggressive commentary." Elizabeth's voice dropped to a whisper, though James knew she was alone in her Beacon Hill mansion. "Did you know about this? About her company?" "No," James admitted, reaching for his laptop. "What does it say?" "It says she's worth billions. James. Billions. With a B." Elizabeth's voice cracked slightly. "Her battery technology is being used by Tesla. The article calls her visionary and groundbreaking. She's being compared to Elon Musk, for God's sake." James had pulled up the Forbes website and was staring at the cover image. Maya looked different. Not physically. She was still the same beautiful woman he had fallen in love with years ago. But there was something in her expression, a self-possession, that he realized had been diminishing during their marriage. "I'll call you back," he told his mother, hanging up before she could protest. For the next hour, James read everything he could find about Horizon Energy Solutions and its enigmatic CTO. The company was valued at over $10 billion after its latest funding round. Their battery technology was being hailed as revolutionary, potentially accelerating the world's transition away from fossil fuels by decades. And at the center of it all was Maya, his Maya, who had apparently been building an empire while he'd been watching his family's legacy crumble. The irony wasn't lost on him. How many times had Elizabeth complained about Maya's obsession with her work? How often had he gently suggested she scale back her professional ambitions to focus on being a Parker wife? And now here she was, more successful than the entire Parker family had ever been, while their fortune was slowly slipping away. James reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found Maya's name. He had never deleted it, though the number had been disconnected years ago. His thumb hovered over the screen. What would he even say? "Congratulations on your success? I'm sorry for not believing in you. Please help save my family's business?" He set the phone down without making the call. That evening, at the weekly Parker family dinner, a tradition that had once been held in Richard and Elizabeth's grand dining room, but had been downsized to James's more modest townhouse, the Forbes issue lay on the table like an unwelcome guest. "I've spoken with Caldwell," Richard said, referring to the family's longtime attorney. "He suggests we might have some claim to her business, given that she developed her initial research while you were married." James stared at his father in disbelief. "We're not suing Maya." "Don't be naive," Elizabeth cut in. "She used connections she made as a Parker. The Parker name opened doors for her." James laughed bitterly. "Is that what you think? That being a Parker was an advantage for her?" He shook his head. "We never valued her work. We never even tried to understand it. I never tried." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. James's younger sister, Caroline, who had always been secretly fond of Maya, spoke up. "Maybe we should just be happy for her. She clearly earned this." Elizabeth shot her daughter a withering look. "Whose side are you on?" "There are no sides, Mother," Caroline replied. "Maya is successful. We're struggling. Those are just facts." Later that night, after his parents and sister had left, James poured himself another drink and returned to his laptop. He found himself watching a video of Maya giving a TED Talk about the future of energy storage. She was magnetic on stage, her passion for the subject evident in every gesture, every carefully chosen word. The true challenge of our time, she was saying, isn't just developing new technologies, but ensuring they benefit everyone, not just those who can afford the latest innovations. James remembered how she had once tried to explain her research to his uncle at a family dinner, only to be interrupted by Elizabeth changing the subject to the restoration of the family's Cape Cod property. How Maya's face had fallen, how she had retreated into silence for the remainder of the evening. He clicked through to Horizon Energy's website and found a contact form for investor relations. Before he could second-guess himself, James filled it out. My name is James Parker, former husband of Dr. Maya Johnson. I would like to speak with her regarding a potential investment opportunity. Please forward my contact information. He included his email and phone number, then hit send before he could change his mind. 3 days passed with no response. James told himself he hadn't really expected one. Why would Maya want anything to do with him after the way things had ended? Then, on the 4th day, as he was leaving a particularly grim meeting with the bank about restructuring the company's debt, his phone buzzed with an email notification. From E. Ramos, CEO, Horizon Energy Solutions. Subject, RE, contact request. Mr. Parker, Dr. Johnson has received your inquiry. As her schedule is extremely limited, she has asked me to determine the nature of your investment interest before considering a meeting. Horizon is not currently seeking additional investors, but we occasionally make exceptions for strategic partnerships. Eliza Ramos, Chief Executive Officer, Horizon Energy Solutions. James stared at the message. It was professional, detached, exactly what he should have expected from Maya's company. He hadn't really thought about what he would say if he got a response. He only knew he needed to see her. He replied, Ms. Ramos, thank you for your response. To be completely transparent, Parker Developments is exploring diversification opportunities in the clean energy sector. Dr. Johnson's knowledge of our investment approach from our previous relationship might make discussions more efficient. I, co-team, would be willing to travel to California at your convenience. James Parker, President, Parker Developments. The response came the next morning. Mr. Parker, Dr. Johnson has agreed to a brief meeting. She will be in Boston next Tuesday for a speaking engagement at MIT. She has a 30-minute window at 2 p.m. Please come to the MIT Media Lab, room 307, E. Ramos. James read the message twice, his heart racing. She was coming to Boston, his territory, and she had agreed to see him. He wasn't sure if this was a good sign, or if Maya simply wanted to face him on what had once been his home turf, to make some point. The 5 days until Tuesday stretched endlessly. James found himself obsessively preparing for the meeting, reading everything he could about sustainable energy investment, rehearsing what he would say. He even bought a new suit, conservative but modern, from a designer he knew Maya had once admired. When Tuesday finally arrived, James reached the MIT Media Lab an hour early. He sat in his car in the parking garage, alternately checking his appearance in the rearview mirror and reviewing notes on his phone. At precisely 1:45 p.m., he made his way to room 307. A young woman with a tablet was stationed outside the door. Name, please? James Parker. I have a 2-hour appointment with Dr. Johnson. She checked her tablet. You're early. Dr. Johnson is still finishing her lecture. You can wait here. She gestured to a small seating area. James sat, trying to calm his nerves. Through the partially open door, he could hear Maya's voice addressing what sounded like a packed auditorium. The question isn't whether we can transition to renewable energy. We absolutely can. The question is whether we have the collective will to make it happen, despite entrenched interests in maintaining the status quo. Her voice was confident, authoritative, so different from the increasingly hesitant way she had spoken at Parker family gatherings near the end of their marriage. At 2 p.m. exactly, applause erupted from the auditorium. A few minutes later, students and faculty began streaming out, many stopping to shake Maya's hand or ask additional questions. James stood as she appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 assistants who were fielding requests for her time with practiced efficiency. When Maya spotted him, she stopped mid-sentence in her conversation with a student. For a brief moment, something flashed across her face. Surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. Then her expression settled into polite professionalism. "James," she said with a slight nod. "Please come in." She led him into the now empty auditorium and gestured to a seat in the front row while she remained standing by the podium. Her assistants positioned themselves near the exits, giving them privacy while remaining visible. "You look well," James said, immediately regretting the banality of the statement. "Thank you." Maya's voice was neutral. "Eliza mentioned you're interested in clean energy investment." "No small talk then. Straight to business." James cleared his throat. "Yes, we've been looking to diversify. The real estate market in Boston has been challenging." "So I've heard." Maya's expression revealed nothing about how closely she might have been following the Parker family's declining fortunes. James shifted uncomfortably. This clinical conversation wasn't what he had imagined. "Maya, Dr. Johnson," she corrected, gently but firmly. In professional settings, the correction stung more than it should have. "Of course, Dr. Johnson." He paused, recalibrating. "Your success is impressive. The Johnson Matrix technology is revolutionary." "Thank you. I saw your Forbes cover." A small smile. "My mother has it framed in her living room, apparently, next to my old science fair ribbons." The mention of her parents, who had never been welcomed into the Parker family circle, reminded James of all the ways he had failed her. "I owe you an apology," he said suddenly. "Many apologies, actually." Maya's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "This meeting was scheduled to discuss potential investment opportunities, Mr. Parker." "I know, but..." James ran a hand through his hair. "Maya, Dr. Johnson, I've been thinking about you since I saw that article. About how things ended. About how I never really supported your work the way I should have." She studied him for a long moment. "And now that my work has made me successful, you're interested in supporting it?" The question hung in the air between them, layered with meaning. James felt the familiar defensiveness rise within him, the Parker family reflex to reject any implied criticism, but he forced it down. "I deserve that," he acknowledged. "But it's not just about the money. Seeing you succeed like this, it made me realize how small our world was, how limited our vision." "Your family's vision," Maya corrected, "not mine." "You're right." James nodded. "I thought I was offering you something valuable by bringing you into the Parker fold. I never understood that we were the ones who could have learned from you." Something shifted in Maya's demeanor. Not warmth, exactly, but a slight relaxation of her guard. "Why are you really here, James?" The question stripped away his prepared talking points about investment opportunities and strategic partnerships. Why was he there? To see her again? To apologize? To ask for help? The truth was complicated, as it always had been between them. "I miss you," he admitted. "Not just as my wife, but as the person who challenged me to think beyond what I already knew. When you left..." He hesitated. "When you left, something in me recognized you were right to go, even as I was angry and hurt. You deserved more than what my family and I were offering you." Maya's expression was unreadable. "And now? Now Parker Developments is struggling," James said honestly. And yes, an investment relationship with Horizon would be valuable to us, but that's not why I contacted you. I reached out because seeing your success made me proud of you, even though I have no right to feel that way. Because I wanted to tell you that you proved all of us wrong, especially my mother. A ghost of a smile crossed Maya's face at the mention of Elizabeth. How is your mother? Horrified that her former daughter-in-law is on the cover of Forbes while Parker Developments is quietly selling off assets. Maya nodded, seeming unsurprised by this assessment. She glanced at her watch. Our time is nearly up, James. I have another commitment. Of course. He stood, feeling the opportunity slipping away. Thank you for seeing me. About your investment inquiry, Maya said, her tone shifting back to professional. Horizon isn't currently seeking traditional investors. However, we are establishing a foundation to help bring our technology to underserved communities. We'll be announcing a matching grant program next month for companies demonstrating commitment to sustainable development in low-income areas. She paused. That might be a more suitable collaboration if Parker Developments is genuinely interested in diversifying. James recognized the olive branch for what it was. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a path forward. One that would require the Parker family to adapt rather than simply write a check. I'd be very interested in learning more about that, he said. Maya nodded to one of her assistants, who approached with a business card. Andrea will send you the details when they're finalized. As James took the card, his fingers brushed against Maya's for the briefest moment. The familiar touch sent an unexpected jolt through him, a reminder of the connection they had once shared. It was good to see you, James, Maya said, her voice softer than it had been throughout their meeting. You too. He hesitated. Would it be possible, that is, would you consider having dinner while you're in town, just to catch up properly? Seeing her expression, he quickly added, professionally, of course. Maya considered him for a moment. I'm afraid my schedule is quite full. Perhaps another time. It was a gentle rejection, wrapped in a vague future possibility that they both knew might never materialize. James nodded, accepting it. Another time, then. As he turned to leave, Maya called after him. James? He looked back, hope rising despite himself. Tell your mother I said hello. The slight smile that accompanied these words carried years of unspoken history. The battles fought, the slights endured, the final victory not in wealth but in vindication. I will, James promised, knowing that delivering this message to Elizabeth would be both a pleasure and a penance. After leaving the media lab, James sat in his car for a long time, replaying the meeting in his mind. Maya had been polite but distant, professional but guarded. She had offered a potential business connection but kept a firm personal boundary. She had called him James and insisted he call her Dr. Johnson. Most tellingly, she hadn't asked a single question about his life in the 5 years since she'd left. James started the car and began the drive back to his office, where he would have to explain to his family that Maya, Dr. Johnson, had not offered to rescue the Parker fortune, but had instead provided a path that would require them to fundamentally change how they did business. As he navigated through Cambridge toward Boston, his phone rang. The screen displayed Mother. James took a deep breath and answered. Hello, Mother. Well? Elizabeth's voice was tense with anticipation. What did she say? Will she invest? James thought of Maya standing confidently at the podium, of the students crowding around her after her lecture, of the subtle but unmistakable power she now wielded so effortlessly. She said to tell you hello, he replied, allowing himself a small smile as he imagined his mother's reaction. The spluttering indignation that followed confirmed he had delivered Maya's message perfectly. That evening, alone in his townhouse, James opened his laptop and searched for the video of Maya's MIT lecture. He watched it from beginning to end, recognizing in her confident presentation and innovative ideas glimpses of the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman who had been slowly disappearing during their marriage as she tried to conform to the Parker family's expectations. When the video ended, James opened a new browser tab and searched for sustainable development in low-income communities. If Parker Developments was going to partner with Horizon Energy's foundation, he needed to understand this world that Maya now inhabited, a world that prioritized innovation and impact over tradition and status. As articles and case studies filled his screen, James felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the excitement of learning something entirely new, of stepping beyond the boundaries of what he had always known. It was, he realized with a pang of regret, exactly what Maya had been trying to share with him during their marriage: the thrill of discovery, the satisfaction of creating something meaningful. He had dismissed her passion then, viewing it as a distraction from what he had considered more important: maintaining the Parker legacy. Now that legacy was crumbling, while Maya's vision was changing the world. The revelation wasn't just that his ex-wife had become successful. It was that she had been extraordinary all along, and he had been too blinded by privilege and tradition to see it. The Reckoning. 6 months after his meeting with Maya at MIT, James sat in the Parker Developments boardroom, surrounded by legal advisors and the remaining members of the executive team. The atmosphere was tense, the faces around the table grim. "The banks won't extend our credit lines," Richard Parker announced, his voice weaker than it had once been but still commanding attention. The minor stroke he had suffered 2 years earlier had left him with a slight slur and an occasionally trembling hand, but his mind remained sharp enough to understand the gravity of their situation. "We have 3 options: sell the company, outright declare bankruptcy, or find a major investor willing to infuse significant capital." James studied the financial reports spread before him. The numbers told a stark story. Despite their cost-cutting measures and asset liquidation, Parker Developments was still hemorrhaging money. Their last 2 projects had gone significantly over budget, and their once sterling reputation had been tarnished by quality issues stemming from their attempts to reduce expenses. "What about the consortium that expressed interest last quarter?" asked Caroline, who had joined the company after completing her MBA, bringing fresh perspectives that were often ignored by their father. "They've reduced their offer by 40%, James replied. "They know we're desperate." Elizabeth, who had insisted on attending all financial meetings since Richard's health issues began, tapped her perfectly manicured nails against the polished mahogany table. "This is unacceptable. The Parker name still means something in this city." James caught Caroline's eye across the table. They both recognized their mother's statement for what it was: wishful thinking. The Parker name had indeed meant something. Once, old money, established power, unquestionable social standing. But Boston's power dynamics had shifted. New tech wealth and innovative development companies had changed the landscape, while the Parkers had clung to their traditional business model until it was too late. "I've been exploring another option," James said carefully, aware that his next words would likely trigger his mother's indignation. "Horizon Energy has established a development fund focused on sustainable community projects. They're looking for established construction partners to implement their technology in affordable housing and mixed-use developments." The silence that followed was profound. Everyone in the room knew exactly what company he was referencing and who ran it. "Absolutely not," Elizabeth said, her voice cold. "We will not go begging to that woman." Richard looked at his son with narrowed eyes. "You've been in contact with her." It wasn't a question. James nodded. "We met briefly when she was lecturing at MIT. She mentioned their foundation was launching a partnership program." "And you didn't think to discuss this with the board?" Richard's tone held the familiar note of disappointment that had shadowed much of James's life. "I'm discussing it now," James replied evenly. "Their program offers matched funding for qualifying projects, technical support for implementation of their energy systems, and priority access to their newest technologies before they reach the broader market. Caroline leaned forward. That could be significant. Their battery and solar integration systems are years ahead of competitors. The Parkers do not need charity from your ex-wife, Elizabeth interjected. James felt a flash of the old familiar frustration with his mother's rigid pride. It's not charity, Mother. It's a business opportunity, one that could quite literally save this company. The discussion devolved into a heated debate, with Elizabeth and Richard resistant to any partnership with Horizon, while the financial advisors and Caroline argued in favor of exploring the option. James found himself in the unfamiliar position of standing firm against his parents, his conviction strengthened by the stark reality of their financial statements. In the end, pragmatism prevailed over pride. Parker Developments would submit an application to Horizon Energy's foundation, proposing to convert one of their stalled luxury developments into a mixed-income sustainable community project. I'll oversee the proposal personally, James told the board, ignoring his mother's thin-lipped disapproval. For the next 3 weeks, James worked longer hours than he had in years, diving deep into research on sustainable building practices, renewable energy integration, and community-centered development models. He consulted with architects and engineers, who specialized in the field, revised budgets, and completely reimagined a project that had originally been conceived as exclusive luxury condominiums. The work was challenging, but energizing. For the first time in years, James felt genuinely excited about their business, not just maintaining the Parker legacy, but potentially transforming it into something with real impact. When the proposal was finally ready, James submitted it to Horizon's Foundation with a personal note to Maya. Dr. Johnson. The attached proposal represents not just a business pivot for Parker Developments, but a philosophical one as well. I believe this project has merit beyond helping our company's financial situation. It has the potential to demonstrate how traditional development firms can successfully transition to more sustainable and inclusive models. I understand if Horizon chooses not to partner with us given our history, but I hope the proposal will be evaluated on its merits. Sincerely, James Parker. 2 weeks later, James received an email notification that Parker Developments had been selected for the final round of evaluation. Representatives from Horizon Energy would be conducting an in-person assessment and interview. The email specified that the meeting would take place at Parker Developments headquarters and requested that all key decision-makers be present. James immediately recognized what this meant. Maya would be facing not just him, but his parents as well. When he informed the family, Elizabeth immediately objected. "This is deliberate humiliation," she insisted. "She wants to witness our desperation firsthand." "Or," Caroline countered, "they're a professional organization conducting due diligence on a major investment decision." "It's a $10 million matching grant, Mother," James added. "They'd be negligent not to meet with us in person." The day of the meeting arrived with a tension that hung in the Parker Developments offices like a storm front. James had ensured everything was impeccably prepared. Presentation materials, refreshments, even fresh flowers in the boardroom. Though he caught himself wondering if Maya would see this as an echo of the performative perfection Elizabeth had always insisted upon in their home. At precisely 10 a.m., the receptionist announced the arrival of the Horizon Energy team. James, Caroline, Richard, and Elizabeth waited in the boardroom, an uncomfortable tableau of Parker family unity. The door opened, and 3 people entered. A young man with a tablet who introduced himself as the program coordinator, a woman in her 50s who was Horizon's head of sustainable development, and Eliza Ramos, not Maya. James felt a complex mixture of disappointment and relief as he greeted Horizon's CEO. Had Maya deliberately avoided the meeting? Or was this simply standard corporate protocol, with the CEO handling important partnerships, while the CTO focused on technology? "Thank you for hosting us today," Eliza said, shaking hands firmly with each Parker in turn. If she noticed Elizabeth's barely concealed disdain, she gave no indication. We've been very impressed with your proposal and are looking forward to discussing it in more detail. The meeting proceeded professionally, with James and Caroline presenting their vision for transforming the stalled luxury development into a mixed-income community with integrated renewable energy systems. The Horizon team asked pointed questions about Parker Development's commitment to sustainability beyond this single project, their community engagement strategies, and their long-term vision. Throughout the discussion, James found himself wondering what Maya would think of their responses, whether she would see genuine transformation or mere financial opportunism. As the meeting neared its scheduled conclusion, Eliza checked her watch. We have one more team member joining us for the final portion of our discussion. Before anyone could respond, the boardroom door opened, and Maya walked in. She was dressed in a simple but elegant navy suit, her hair pulled back in a sleek style that emphasized her face, a face that betrayed no emotion as she surveyed the room. Her eyes moved from James to Caroline, lingered briefly on Richard, and finally rested on Elizabeth. "Dr. Johnson," James said, rising to his feet. "Thank you for joining us." Maya nodded in acknowledgement. "I apologize for my delayed arrival. I was completing a call with our research team in Germany." She took the empty seat beside Eliza, directly across from Elizabeth. "Please, continue." The atmosphere in the room had shifted palpably. Richard sat straighter in his chair, his jaw set. Elizabeth's expression had frozen into the polite mask she reserved for people she considered adversaries. Even Caroline, who had no personal history with Maya, seemed tense. "We were just concluding our discussion of the technical aspects of the proposal," Eliza explained. "Dr. Johnson wanted to address some final points personally." Maya opened a slim folder she had brought with her. "Parker Development's proposal is technically sound and aligns with our foundation's mission. However, before we make our final decision, I wanted to discuss the cultural aspects of this potential partnership." "Cultural aspects?" Richard echoed. "Yes," Maya said evenly. "Sustainable development isn't just about environmental considerations. It's about creating truly inclusive communities and workplaces. Our foundation requires all partner organizations to demonstrate commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in their own corporate structure and practices." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed slightly. "Parker Developments has always maintained the highest standards of professionalism." "I'm sure," Maya replied with a neutral smile. "However, our due diligence has indicated that your executive team and board remain quite homogeneous. As part of any partnership agreement, we would require concrete steps toward diversifying your leadership and implementing inclusive hiring practices." The request, or rather requirement, hung in the air. James glanced at his parents, seeing the familiar resistance to change in their expressions. But he also recognized the implicit message in Maya's words. This was a test, not just of their business model, but of their willingness to truly transform. "We would welcome guidance on developing those initiatives," James said before his parents could object. "In fact, Caroline has already drafted a proposal for revising our hiring and promotion processes." Caroline looked surprised but quickly recovered. "Yes, I'd be happy to share that work and discuss how we might expand it to meet Horizon standards." Maya's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Excellent. There's one more thing." She turned a page in her folder. "As you know, our foundation's matching grants are substantial. In exchange, we typically take a board seat with our partner organizations to ensure alignment with our mission over time." Richard stiffened. "The Parker family has maintained controlling interest in this company for 3 generations. And that could continue," Maya assured him. "We're not seeking controlling interest, merely appropriate oversight of our investment." "Who would hold this board seat?" Elizabeth asked, her voice sharp. Maya met her former mother-in-law's gaze directly. "I would." The statement landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of tension across the table. The implication was clear. Maya Johnson, once dismissed as unsuitable for the Parker family, would now have a voice in their company's decisions. James watched his mother's face flush with indignation, saw his father's jaw tighten. The old Parker pride was rising, threatening to override good business sense in favor of maintaining their perceived dignity. Before they could respond, James spoke. "We would be fortunate to have someone of Dr. Johnson's expertise on our board. Her insights would be invaluable as we navigate this transition." Elizabeth shot him a look of betrayal, but James continued steadily. "If these terms are acceptable to both parties, I believe we have the foundation for a productive partnership." Maya studied him for a moment, perhaps searching for signs of insincerity or manipulation. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her. "There would be legal documents to finalize, of course," she said. "But yes, I believe we do." As the meeting concluded and the Horizon team prepared to leave, Maya lingered briefly. She glanced around the boardroom, at the oil portraits of Parker patriarchs that lined one wall, at the scale models of their most prestigious developments, at the subtle signifiers of old wealth and tradition. "You know," she said quietly, "there was a time when I tried so hard to belong in your world. I never realized that I was already building a better one of my own." With that, she extended her hand professionally to each Parker in turn, even Elizabeth, who accepted it with rigid courtesy. "We'll be in touch with the next steps," Maya said, her voice back to its businesslike tone. "Thank you for your time, today." As the door closed behind the Horizon team, silence descended on the boardroom. It was Richard who broke it. "You orchestrated this," he accused James. "You knew exactly what she would demand." "I suspected," James admitted. "But I also knew it was our best option, maybe our only option. And honestly, Father, would it be so terrible to have new perspectives on our board? To build something different from what we've always done?" "She wants revenge," Elizabeth declared. "This is about humiliating us, forcing us to answer to her after the way she left." Caroline, who had remained mostly quiet throughout the exchange, shook her head. "I don't think so. From everything I've seen, Dr. Johnson has built something remarkable based on innovation and inclusion. If she wanted revenge, she could have simply watched us fail from afar." Elizabeth began to object, but James cut her off gently. "Mother, the world has changed. We can change with it, or we can fade away clinging to the past. Maya, Dr. Johnson, is offering us a path forward. Yes, it requires us to adapt, to accept her at our table. But perhaps that's exactly what this company has needed all along. Someone who sees beyond what we've always been to what we could become." The debate continued for hours, extending into a tense family dinner that evening. But ultimately, pragmatism again prevailed over pride. Parker Developments would accept Horizon Energy's terms. 2 months later, James stood at the podium on the site of what had once been planned as the Parker Estates, an exclusive enclave of multi-million-dollar homes, and was now becoming Horizon Commons, a mixed-income sustainable community featuring Horizon Energy's cutting-edge solar and battery technology. Beside him stood Maya, representing Horizon Energy Foundation, and the mayor of Boston, eager to associate himself with a project that promised both environmental benefits and affordable housing. Cameras flashed as they each took symbolic shovels for the groundbreaking ceremony. "This partnership represents more than just a construction project," James told the assembled press and community members. "It represents a new direction for Parker Developments, one that honors our tradition of quality while embracing innovation and inclusion." When it was Maya's turn to speak, she was characteristically focused on the technology and community benefits, rather than the personal narrative that the press seemed eager to extract from the situation. "Horizon Energy believes that sustainable living shouldn't be a luxury," she said. "This project demonstrates how thoughtful design and innovative technology can create communities that are both environmentally responsible and economically diverse." Only once did she allude to their shared history, when a reporter bluntly asked about the awkwardness of partnering with her ex-husband's family. "Life often takes unexpected turns," Maya replied with a small smile. "Sometimes those turns lead to opportunities for growth that benefit everyone involved." Later, as the crowd dispersed and the formal photographs had been taken, James found himself momentarily alone with Maya near the architectural renderings displayed for the event. "Thank you," he said simply. "Not just for the partnership, but for pushing us to be better." Maya studied the renderings rather than looking at him. "The design is quite innovative. Your team has embraced the sustainability concepts wholeheartedly." "They have," James agreed. "Especially Caroline. She's become our biggest advocate for change." He hesitated. "You know, she always admired you, even when my parents were at their most difficult." A hint of a genuine smile crossed Maya's face. "I'm glad to hear that. She seems very capable." "She is." James paused. "I've been learning a lot from her, actually. About listening to new ideas. About recognizing when traditions need to evolve." Maya finally turned to face him fully. "That's good to hear, James." The use of his first name, without the professional distance she had maintained since their reconnection, felt significant. "I still think about us sometimes," he admitted quietly. "About how different things might have been if I'd supported you, the way you deserved." Maya's expression softened. "We can't change the past. But this," she gestured to the project renderings, "this is a good present, and potentially a very good future." Before James could respond, they were interrupted by Eliza, who needed Maya for a media interview. As Maya walked away, James felt a complex mixture of regret and hope. Regret for what had been lost, hope for what might still be built, if not between them personally, then through the legacy of their work together. 2 years after the groundbreaking of Horizon Commons, Maya stood in the community center at the heart of the completed development. Large windows filled the space with natural light, while Horizon's solar glass technology generated power, even as it regulated the building's temperature. Around her, residents and visitors mingled at the project's official opening celebration. The development had transformed not just the physical space, but Parker Developments itself. Under the partnership with Horizon Energy, the company had embraced sustainable building practices across all its projects. Their board had diversified, their workforce had broadened, and they had begun to rebuild their reputation as an innovative, forward-thinking firm, rather than simply a bastion of old Boston money. Maya watched as Caroline Parker enthusiastically explained the building's energy systems to a group of engineering students from MIT, students much like Maya had once been. Caroline had emerged as the true change agent within the Parker family, championing new directions and eventually taking over day-to-day operations from James, who had stepped into a strategic advisory role. Elizabeth Parker had initially refused to attend any events related to the Horizon partnership, but Richard's second, more severe stroke had softened her somewhat. Today she stood near the refreshment table, not exactly comfortable but making an effort for her husband, who watched the proceedings from his wheelchair with quiet pride in what the family business had become. "Quite a transformation," said a voice beside Maya. She turned to find James, looking more relaxed than she had seen him in years. The sharp suits and rigid posture that had been his armor in the Parker world had given way to a more casual, authentic presence. "Yes," Maya agreed. "The energy efficiency metrics are exceeding even our projections." James smiled. "I meant in all of us, actually. But yes, the technical results are impressive too." Maya allowed herself to really look at her ex-husband. The past 2 years of collaboration had gradually shifted their relationship from strained professional courtesy to something resembling mutual respect. They would never be friends in the conventional sense. Too much history lay between them for that. But they had found a way to work together that honored both their past and their separate journeys. "Your niece seems quite taken with the technology," Maya observed, nodding toward Caroline's daughter, 12-year-old Sophie, who was peppering one of Horizon's engineers with questions about the battery storage system. James chuckled. "She talks about you constantly. Aunt Maya this and Aunt Maya that. I think you've inspired a future engineer." The notion that she had become someone's role model, especially within the Parker family, struck Maya as both ironic and deeply satisfying. "She's welcome to visit our research center anytime," Maya offered. "We have a program for young women interested in STEM." "She'd love that," James replied. He hesitated, then added, "I'm moving to our Chicago office next month, taking a step back from Boston for a while." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Your mother's idea?" "Mine, actually," James said. "Caroline is ready to lead here, and I think I need some distance from—" He gestured vaguely, encompassing both the family business and perhaps their shared history. Maya nodded understanding. "Fresh starts can be valuable." "Yes," James agreed, looking at her meaningfully. "You taught me that." Across the room, Maya's assistant caught her eye, tapping her watch to indicate it was time for Maya's next appointment. She had a flight to catch, back to California, to her life that had expanded in ways she could never have imagined when she left the Parkers' Hamptons house all those years ago. "I should go," she said. James nodded. "Thank you, Maya, for everything. The partnership, the technology, but mostly for showing us another way forward. I know my family didn't make it easy." "No," Maya agreed with a small smile. "But then, nothing truly transformative ever is." As she made her way toward the exit, Maya passed Elizabeth Parker, who had been watching her conversation with James with an unreadable expression. The two women regarded each other for a moment. "The project turned out well," Elizabeth said stiffly, offering the closest thing to a compliment she had ever directed toward Maya. "Yes," Maya agreed. "It did." A beat of silence passed between them. Two strong women who would never like each other, but had reached a point where they could acknowledge each other's place in the world they shared. "James tells me your niece is interested in engineering," Maya said finally. Elizabeth's expression flickered with something complicated, perhaps remembering how she had once dismissed Maya's professional passion as unbecoming for a Parker wife. "Sophie has always been unconventional," Elizabeth replied carefully. "That's often how innovation begins," Maya said gently, "by seeing beyond convention." Without waiting for a response, Maya continued toward the door, exchanging brief goodbyes with others as she passed. Outside, her driver waited to take her to the airport. As the car pulled away from Horizon Commons, Maya looked back at the development, at the solar panels glinting in the sunlight, at the diverse group of residents now making their homes there, at the plaque near the entrance that bore both the Parker and Horizon names. She thought about the path that had brought her here, about the painful night she had overheard James and his mother dismissing her as someone who didn't fit in. How right they had been, though not in the way they had intended. She hadn't fit into their narrow world of tradition and status, but she had found her place in a much larger one of innovation and impact. The silent departure she had once made from the Parker family had come full circle. She had returned not as a supplicant seeking approval, but as a leader transforming an industry. The power she now wielded came not from marriage or social connections, but from her own mind and determination. As Boston receded in her rearview mirror, Maya smiled at the symmetry of it all. She had left with nothing but her education and resolve. She had returned with a vision that was changing the world, a vision clear enough that even the Parkers had eventually been able to see it. Sometimes, she reflected, the most powerful form of vindication wasn't in confrontation or revenge, but in success so profound it transformed not just your own life, but the lives of those who once underestimated you. In helping the Parkers evolve, she had converted old wounds into new possibilities, creating something more valuable than mere retribution. The true reckoning hadn't been a moment of triumph over her former in-laws, but the gradual, undeniable demonstration that her worth had never been dependent on their validation. And perhaps that was the most satisfying victory of all.